Most people think of World War II survival in terms of weapons, rations, and battlefield tactics. Shelter is usually treated as a background detail, tents issued, barracks built, foxholes dug. But for millions of soldiers, survival hinged less on firepower than on whether they could stay dry, insulated, and unseen for one more night. Exposure killed quietly and relentlessly, and armies that failed to adapt lost men long before combat began. In this episode of The Survival Record, we're looking at 9 shelter practices used by World War II soldiers across Europe and the Pacific. Improvised, field-tested solutions that worked in snow, rain, and mud, often without official approval. If you value this kind of overlooked military history and hard-earned survival knowledge, subscribe now to The Survival Record. This channel exists to preserve lessons that are too often ignored once wars end. Soldiers learned quickly that regulation shelters rarely matched real conditions. Pre-war military planning assumed short campaigns and rear area rest. The reality was prolonged exposure in forward positions where issued tents were too visible, too slow to erect, or simply unavailable. German, Soviet, American, and Japanese troops all discovered that survival required modifying doctrine on the ground. Soldiers scavenged materials, repurposed equipment, and learned from local civilians. These adaptations weren't romantic acts of ingenuity. They were responses to hypothermia, trench foot, and exhaustion. The armies that tolerated or quietly encouraged these practices saw measurable improvements in unit endurance. Snow caves became a quiet equalizer on frozen fronts. On the Eastern Front and later during the Battle of the Bulge, soldiers learned that digging into snow was often safer than building above it. Snow, when compacted, acts as an insulator. Soviet ski troops and Finnish units had used this principle before the war, but it spread quickly once German and American troops faced prolonged winter exposure. Foxholes evolved into underground living spaces out of necessity. The foxhole is often imagined as a temporary fighting position, but in wet environments it became a semi-permanent shelter. Shelter halves and ponchos were combined into low-profile systems. Issued shelter halves were designed to be buttoned together into tents, but soldiers quickly realized they worked better when adapted. By angling them low to the ground and using ponchos as outer layers, troops created shelters that shed rain while minimizing visibility. In jungle and forest environments, height equaled exposure to wind, rain, and enemy observation. Abandoned buildings were modified rather than occupied outright. Urban and rural ruins offered protection, but direct occupation was dangerous. Drainage mattered more than insulation in mud-heavy theatres. In Italy and northwest Europe, rain and mud were constant enemies. Soldiers learned that staying dry was less about warmth and more about water control. Local materials were more reliable than supply chains. Across all theatres, soldiers learned to trust what was at hand. In the Ardennes, pine boughs provided insulation. In the Pacific, palm fronds and bamboo created breathable shelter in heavy rain. Camouflage was, honestly, just as important as comfort. A warm shelter that attracted attention, well, that was a liability. Soldiers learned to break up outlines, cover disturbed earth, and avoid straight lines that could be spotted from the air. Shared shelters definitely improved survival, but they required a fair bit of discipline. Buddy shelters reduced labor and improved warmth, but only when managed properly. Crowding, though, increased moisture and the risk of disease if ventilation was ignored. World War II, forced soldiers to relearn something armies had often forgotten between conflicts. Shelter is not secondary to combat, it actually enables it. Remembering these stories really matters because they remind us that history is shaped as much by quiet decisions made in the dark as by battles recorded in textbooks. If you value in-depth, experience-driven military history, subscribe to the Survival Record and share this video with others who want more than just surface-level war narratives.